You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
Hello everyone, welcome back to episode 222 of Arsenal Pass. Hayden Dale here with Pankaj Bhojwani. As always, this week on the pod, we are talking Singapore World Tour. The Pro Tour kicks off this weekend in Singapore, Sentosa Island. Pankaj, I know it's probably your favorite part of your home place of Singapore, surely. But no, I'm really looking forward to this Pro Tour being out on the island, as they say. And yeah, lots to come in this pod. We're going to talk predictions. We're going to talk our meta breakdown, what we think we're going to see from the meta, top decks, things to watch, all those good things. But first of all, of course, Pankaj, how was your week in Flesh and Blood?
It's been good. You couldn't even get through that sentence without laughing halfway through it. Just goes to show, you know. I've had some fun on Sentosa before. I went luging, all those good things. Yeah, of course. No, it is. Yeah, it is fun. Yeah, it's a fun place for sure. This is an early record for us as well. We are recording on the Monday Singapore time, so it's actually just been a few days since we recorded the previous pod. But we still obviously have tons to talk about. There was a battle hardened this past weekend, so my week in Flesh and Blood has really just been tuning into the coverage as much as I can. I've still yet to go meet the team who arrived on Friday because I kind of blocked out my weekend for family because it was kind of like this is the only weekend I'm free to hang out with them. But shortly after we're done recording this, I will go ahead and meet up with them finally. So I'm looking forward to that. And the next few days are definitely going to be dedicated like in-house testing and just getting onto Sentosa and is getting in the Pro Tour mood for sure. Nice. So yeah, really looking forward to that. And yeah, this past weekend was mostly tuning into the Battle Hardened and the ProQuest Plus.
Where are most people staying in Singapore for the Pro Tour, do you think? Are they staying sort of down around like Chinatown, closer to Marina Bay? Like, where do you think people are staying? Are people staying on Sentosa?
Yeah, I think...
Surely not.
I doubt many people are staying on Sentosa. It's quite expensive. I know at least like a lot of my team is staying on. A lot of Stroop Waffles are staying in Chinatown, and around that area and like Harbourfront. I think some people as well. Harbourfront is a lot easier to get to Sentosa from Harbourfront. So yeah, that's. Where are you staying when you get here?
I'm near Chinatown. I go where the food is, my man. That's where I stay.
There is very good food there.
It might be slightly less convenient, but
Yeah. Cool. How's your week in Flesh and Blood?
It's good. Like you say, it's 4 or 5 days since we last recorded the pod. 5 days, I think. 4 days? 4 days? Something like that. Not long after we just dropped the last pod, though. And I'm still trying to work out what I'm playing at this PT. This we'll talk about as we get into meta predictions, breakdown, decks to watch, all these things. This pod is dropping the morning of the PT basically. So as you kind of, I guess you can probably listen to this and then go watch day one coverage. This will be out before day one coverage. So just before. So, it's a nice lead in if you already listened to this, or if you're listening to this just before coverage, or maybe you listen to it after day one, whatever. But we'll talk through, and then you can, if that's the case, and you can tell us whether our predictions are right or not. Obviously, you'll already know. And if not, you can hear our predictions and go straight into the coverage and see whether we are right or wrong and to what level. But this meta is, I think, very interesting. Deck selection in this format, I believe, to be very tough. I don't think it's particularly straightforward. And also, I've still continued to struggle a little bit with draft, although I've had a few successes now in draft. I think I fixed a few of my fundamental problems I had with this draft format. So I'm feeling more confident about that as we head, a week, less than a week towards the PT. 4 days.
Are you more comfortable with drafting Puffin at this point? And have you come around on Goldwing Turbine being an excellent puff?
I'm fine drafting any of the heroes. And in terms of Goldwing Turbine, I mean, that card is good. Yep, that card is very solid. It's definitely slightly more important than maybe I thought it was earlier on. I don't think it's better, though. I think that card is important, though, for particular turns in Puffin.
Arsenal Pass limited review rating scale, quick, just one off. Goldwing Turbine, come back to it. What is it?
Oh, what's the scale again? You have to jog my memory.
It's just A is like.
Oh, the limited scale. Sorry, I thought you were talking about that new scale that we introduced but then never used again.
We introduced? I don't even remember.
For meta impact, remember when we were talking about previews for The Hunted? We brought in a impact scale. We haven't revisited the impact scale again.
I'm talking for the limited set review, the A to D.
Oh yeah, that card. Red. Are you talking just red specifically?
Yeah, that's
B minus.
I'm sticking with A. I think it's kind of. I think a Puffin deck that doesn't have it is kind of noticeably weaker.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. But I think people in general see Puffin to be slightly weaker, right? So maybe B. Maybe give it a B. But I also think you can, because of the ways I want to play that card, I often think that yellow and blue are replacement level. So anyway.
Yeah, the blue is pretty good, I think.
I think the blue is very good. But yes, that's been my week in Flesh and Blood. I'm excited to do a couple of drafts in person on Thursday before the PT as well. I'm a fly in, fly out this time around. I get in late Wednesday night and I fly out Sunday evening. Unfortunately, it's just the way it is with this one. But yes, still just as much looking forward to it.
Yeah, I won't have that much time to get all the great food then, but I'm sure you get.
I'll do my best to jam it all in.
I've been overeating so much. I swear, I've been eating like 2 meals worth, like every lunch and dinner, just because I want to stuff myself before I get back to the US. So okay, so walk us through. What's your? I mean, this is a bit of a, how do I say it? Normally, it's not usual for you to be this lost on a CC deck. The week leading up to a major, I would say. So what's your, I don't know, game plan to figure out which CC deck you're bringing and how? Again, I'm shocked. Like normally you're like, okay, this is what I'm bringing and this is my backup, and now you're sitting here being like, I have no idea, which is it's a very unique position. I've never seen you in this position, so I'm curious how you're feeling about that and how you're going to move forward.
Yeah, I think I went wrong maybe a week and a half ago where I probably should have just decided. I think the meta is so close, and again we'll get into it, that I think I probably should have just decided what I was going to play and just worked out my matchups, because I think there is enough in that is like I should have chosen one of the 3 best decks. I think it'd been like, right, I'm playing one of the 3 best decks, and then I'm going to work out how to address any concerns I have with the matchup spread, for instance. And I think instead what I did was continue to dive down a well of trying to find other options that weren't those 3 decks and find angles into the meta. And I think basically where it's landed me is between probably realistically like 4 different decks. And in the end, I think probably what I will do is lean on my amazing teammates, shout out to PCG Invasion, and probably pick up one of the decks that some of them are playing and really rely on, what they've been testing. And I have played, of the decks that I think are being considered, I have played a decent chunk of those, so I understand the heroes and the game plans and stuff, but the refinement process, I probably haven't been as across as what some of them have been sort of. They've got some amazing players on that team. So,
how are you feeling about the reps though? Because I definitely get the deck refinement. It's like you can lean on the team. But when I think about, say, a deck like Gravy, which I don't know if you are considering, but I think about a deck like Gravy, and it's more than just having the correct AT, right? Especially a deck like that really needs you to have like 40. Like there's so many just heuristics when it comes to. I think the pirate heroes kind of all have this because of the gold mechanic. There's this whole heuristics you have to go through and how much risk you want to take versus how risk averse you want to be, and like what sort of game state are you in, and you can turn the dial up or down depending. Whether if you're ahead, you can be more risk averse, but if you're behind, you can be more risk tolerant, things like that. So, how do you feel about the rep side of it? If you do end up, picking one of the deck lists that the team brings to you.
Yeah, get in the comment section for Pankaj hitting double heuristics in that paragraph as well. That's a Brennan Patrick special right there. I am not choosing a deck that I'm not familiar with, at least. Like, I'm not choosing a deck that I haven't had reps with in some way, shape, or form. At least a decent number of them, that's for sure. So, yeah. That's why
sounds good.
It's down to one of the 4 decks that I have been playing and testing and learning a decent amount of. But yeah, no Gravy for me, though. I'm off the Gravy train.
All right. Should we move on to the news then?
Mm-hmm.
So, short news segment this time because it's an early record for us, so not too much has happened since the last time. We did have Battle Hardened Kuala Lumpur this past weekend, though. Congrats to Evan Tang. I don't know how to pronounce his last name. Do you know how to pronounce? Tangai? Yeah. Evan Tangai, who won it on Gravy in a finals match against Syndra. And then the ProQuest Plus was actually a Dash.io finals. And taken down by Esmond Hang. Shout out Esmond Hang as well. Floating out ProQuest Plus on Dash.io. So
was Seb Sutherland in the final? Did I hear that correctly as well?
I think so. I'm pretty sure he was the other Dash.io in the top 8 of the ProQuest Plus.
That's pretty funny. Wow, is that a spanner in the works for this coming weekend that we might need to address?
I know some people are looking at Dash.io, and I'm down to talk about it in the main topic. I think there are some there's some things that might be surprising about the deck that people should definitely get reps into going to Singapore, I think.
Yeah, Tom Dowling was like really big on it. He played it at Nationals, Australian Nationals, and he was saying like he thinks that where these lists are at right now, for instance, the one that won the Netherlands and was a mirror in the Netherlands as well. List that was played by
Ian Drum.
Yeah, and the other player who's I think quite a well-known Dash.io, well-known Dash.io player. I think Tom ended up playing basically his list at Australian Nationals as well. So yeah, I think I'm hearing a decent amount about Dash.io. Also, just to note, Evan Tangai is our High Seas Premier champion, World Premier champion, calling champion. Just it's a reminder as well. He's been burning it up every time he visits Europe from his native nation of France. Asia from his native nation of France.
Aside from that, in the news, just Proto Singapore's this weekend. Tune in. As we drop the pod, as Hayden mentioned, the show should be starting. So go ahead and listen to this before the show or after show, whatever. But yes, Proto Singapore's happening. Tune into that.
Yeah, I'm going to try and time it.
Hayden will be playing?
Yeah, I will be. But I'm going to try and time it so that when you've just heard Pankaj plug it, it's probably about an hour away until it starts. And that will be a perfect time for the podcast to end and for you to go and watch the show. So there you go.
As long as we do stick to an hour for the main topic, which we are definitely known to do. We definitely don't yap and go way over time.
Never.
Yeah.
Commander Cookout time. If you want to get your questions in for the Commander Cookout, please do so. You can drop them in the YouTube comments below. Let us know it is a question for the Commander Cookout. You can drop them in our Spotify comments if you want to as well. If you're an audio-only listener, you can email us at arsenalpassfab@gmail.com. If you're an Arsenal Pass patron, you can drop it in our Patreon Discord, or you can maybe see us this weekend in Singapore and give us a note with your question on it. This question comes from our pod the week before last, which was our Super Slam podcast as well. We talked a little bit about the meta post week 2 at the time of national season. This comes from Gabrielle Barrett on YouTube. You both have very developed thoughts on the top of the meta. What about innovations happening on the bottom of the meta? I've seen a lot of players experimenting with Nimby and Ira and Bolton, as well as Katsu trying the new Ira cards. Does any of this tech have promise? And I think this is a great question as we head to Pro Tour and World Tour Singapore, because I think we will probably see at least something out of left field, whether it has success or not. I think we always usually find like one thing that comes out of the event. So I think it's always a really relevant question, a good time for this question from Gabrielle Barrett here. Pankaj, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think we touched on this a little bit last week, so I want to, but I'll reiterate a little bit. So, okay, specifically Nimby. Okay, I haven't seen Nimby and Ira, but Nimby and Bolton was something that Yuki took to her Canadian Nationals. And this the Katsu experimenting with our cards is definitely something I've seen some people trying internally as well. And it comes back to what we spoke about last week, Hayden, where it's you will be playing against the best players at a Pro Tour, people who have definitely tried this left field sort of strategies and know how to beat it. And what you brought up specifically last week is they will run you into those turns where your hand doesn't convert very well. And I think that is the problem that I've seen so far with like the Katsu stuff, where it is still quite an inconsistent deck. It definitely has it has a very powerful ceiling, like to the point of sometimes you're like, wait, this just feels like there's some turns where I'm like, this reminds me of Zen, where it's like he goes bonds into bonds into bonds, and like, wait, this is insane. But then he also has those turns where the Edge of Autumn got banished, and then he draws his hand of no starter, and then it's just 5-card pass back in a sense, or like sends like 5 damage or something. And the Bolton thing, like I'm just building off of Yuki telling us about her experience at Canadian Nationals, bringing that deck, where it is so reliant on specifically seeing like V of the Vanguard, where it's like she just had games where she didn't see that card and then kind of just lost because of it. And again, it just comes back to the inconsistency piece that we were talking about last week. That is my current impression of these decks. It could definitely be the case where maybe we saw those inconsistencies and then dropped the deck before maybe trying to iron them out. I think that could be possible, but that's my current impression.
Yeah, I think we spoke. Yeah, like it's funny the topic we spoke about last week in terms of what we got to around why top decks are top decks and why some of those other decks on the outside looking in are in that position in this meta, and it came down to the conversation about consistency and I do think that is true with a lot of these sort of, I don't say gimmicky, but these sort of innovations that people try is that they rely on very specific card interactions, or you have to put a card that's when you draw it in isolation is not good in your deck versus a card that is good in your deck, but you have to draw it at the right times, or you have to draw a specific card for that deck to be good, right? You spoke about Via the Vanguard, for instance. And I think this is just a real challenge to be this place in the meta when you've got, on one hand, decks being very aggressive, and then on the other hand, decks trying to really take advantage of poor hands to do some really silly things, right? Some really big turns in the instance of Gravy, for instance, where they can really punish you for those things. So I think if any of this tech is going to be viable, it's going to have to be consistent, right? It's going to have to be inherently powerful, but also consistent. I do think, or I would have thought that people would have found those things by now, and I think people have been trying the Katsu decks, for instance, with the new Ira cards, and I think people have found that is, to your point, it is powerful, right? But it does have the consistency. It doesn't seem to, and defensive fridges are a real problem for it. Equipment seats are a real problem for that deck, and there's these other things that kind of crop up for them. And then I think there's other things at the other end of the meta, like different strategies, and I think we'll get onto more strategies in the main topic that potentially might be viable, but again, it's just like, are they quite good enough, or can they target a specific wedge of the meta that makes them good enough? That's actually what I'm more interested in. That's where I think we might see some success from people bringing innovation towards the bottom of the meta, is where they find an angle into, say, if we think the top 3 decks this week might be Syndra, Gravy Bones, and Arachne slips through the cracks, can they potentially sack a bunch of other matchups but be really good into that wedge with some sort of innovation? Great, that's exciting, right? But I think the decks are maybe different. The top decks are maybe different enough, maybe resilient enough that it's hard to be able to target all 3 of those things. And
one aspect I want to bring up is that this is obviously a mixed format. So I do think the consistency piece, perhaps, there is, I think, some level of, okay, you can take this potentially high risk, high reward deck because you're not playing as many CC rounds as like a full CC calling. So I could totally see a Katsu that's running hot for their 6 or 7 CC rounds, doing really well in draft and making top 8 because of it. Because I do think Katsu, at least over, I would say, Bolton and probably over Ira as well, does have a bit of a unique angle in this meta, particularly into Syndra and Gravy. Because something that's consistent across these top decks is that there has been a surprising lack of defense reactions. We're quite far away on that front from compared to like London, where everyone was packing 9 like defense reactions because of Aurora. Now I'm seeing these like Gravy lists that consistently just 1 or 2 blood in the waters. Syndra's like not running any defense reactions. Earth has fallen out of the meta like a decent amount. Like Florian's nowhere to be seen. And in that sort of meta, you look at something like Katsu against a deck like Syndra and Gravy, which don't block very well. It's susceptible to on hits. I'm like, there is a unique angle there. I definitely see the appeal. It just comes back to the consistency, where I'm like, you draw the hands where it's like 4 blues, no starter nonsense, and it's just.
Yeah, and the other deck has such powerful enough turns they can get back into the game, right? Even through all the good work you've done. That's the problem you've got to worry about. Yeah. Exactly. Look, I'd say it's interesting. You talk about Katsu. I mean, shout out to my Polish friends. Remember the Polish team bringing Katsu to a pro tour? I mean, it's been, people have tried it before. Didn't quite work out that time. I would say, though, if you take a high-risk strategy, you've got to be really confident in your draft. And, one sort of poor seating in the draft or something goes a little bit wrong, or, you get paired into return fire in your draft. Your opponent has return fire, and all of a sudden, you've dropped a game in draft, plus you're playing a high-risk CC deck. So, it's tough. It's tough.
Oh, I just realized something, Hayden. We might have moved past too quickly from the news section.
Yes.
Azalea LL.
Yes, I was going to come back to that. It's literally what I was about to come back to.
Azalea did LL this past weekend. She was 1 point away the last time we recorded. She picked up a win I don't remember.
Battle in Bucharest, I believe.
Oh, wait.
Hungary. Okay.
Yep. Yes, okay, so picked up a win there and is out of the format, which... Again, we spoke about this, where it's like she's not really gatekeeping anything. Maybe Acilio. I think perhaps Acilio is like the biggest winner of Azalea going away.
I could see that.
But yeah, there's something to bring up, and we can get more into that in the main topic.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you for the question, Gabriel Barrett. If you want to get your questions in, like we say, please do so. Otherwise, Pankaj, I think it's time to move on to the main topic of the pod and talk Pro Tour / World Tour Singapore predictions. And I think the best place to start is with effectively a lead-in event, right? Over 100 plus players, many of which will be at Pro Tour / World Tour Singapore this coming weekend, showed up to the Battle Hardened and ProQuest Plus in Kuala Lumpur. And we have, some data to take away from this. You already spoke about, of course, Gravy in the hands of Evan winning the Battle Hardened, Dash.io winning the ProQuest Plus. But I want to talk a little bit about the metagame as well for that event. So Battle Hardened Kuala Lumpur, top decks played. Syndra and Gravy Bones are actually tied for the number one most played deck, with Arachne Slips Through the Cracks just slightly behind them. So 13 for Gravy and Syndra, 11 copies for Arachne Slips Through the Cracks. And then it was actually Azalea, which of course we don't have to worry about anymore because it has Living Legend. You look down after those top three decks, and there's quite a big gap between those three decks. And then what comes after that, where there's just a slew of decks at 6 and 5 and 4 played. Dash.io, Kano, Victor, Jarl, Verdance, and then you go down again, a lot of 2s and 3s. So as we said, we spoke last week about this meta potentially, as we hit Singapore, being very widespread. I'm going to make a call right now. I think the calling will have the flattest spread of hero representation we've ever seen at a calling, which I don't think is a crazy claim because obviously there's a lot of heroes in the format right now, but I think also it'll be quite significant just because of how widespread I think this meta is right now and how many viable options players see, especially in that tier 2 category of deck.
Agreed. I think it'll be quite a flat spread on the calling at least. I do think there is some coalescing going on, and I think I'm just going to start us off talking about at least one of these top 3 heroes. And the one I want to focus on to begin with is Slip Through the Cracks, because I think as we looked at the national season results, the overall national season results was 8 Syndras and 8 Slippies.
Yes.
And I think there was a bit of a narrative, at least last week, where it's like, oh, is Slippy just the new best deck? Is it the new big bad? Does it have as high as a target on its back? And this, at least this past weekend, the Battle Hardened KL, it still feels like the top players. And the Battle Hardened was obviously being won on Gravy. We saw Michael Fung, Michael Hamilton. I think Hamilton was at the event. I know Michael Fung definitely was. All these Hamilton top players are on Gravy Bones. So I'm not entirely sure how much of a shift I'm expecting towards Slip Through the Cracks, given how well he did in national season. What's your take on this hero? And obviously we think Slip Through the Cracks will be in the top 3 represented.
Yeah.
But what's your take on I guess the adoption rate percentage? Or do you expect it to be higher of in this 3? And I guess also in terms of known Pro Tour players, how much buy-in do you think this hero?
It's tough. I think Slippy, Assassins generally shine in tighter metas, I think, in metas that are more targetable, right? And that's a good thing for Slips Through the Cracks, right? I think, we saw it be an option at Pro Tour London, of course, famously Azuri coming out and winning Amsterdam, right? In that meta as well. I just think traditionally that is the case because you get to build specifically for these metas. It's really hard, I think, to be good into a lot of different decks because your strategies often, your cards you play can be a little bit more targeted, I think, with the attack actions particularly. So I do think it is good with a narrowed meta. That being said, I still think when we get to this PT, it's not going to be as narrow a PT meta as other PTs. And I think where people will choose to play Slip Through the Cracks will be, for their Syndra matchup in particular. And I think it'll be Slippy players that think they have a good Gravy Bones matchup. I'm not actually certain that is fact for Slip Through the Cracks. I actually think it's Gravy Bones favored. But what will be a challenge for Slip Through the Cracks is what happens after these 3 heroes, right? Does it have good game into... Oh, it does have into Kane, I'll tell you what. Does it have good game into the Guardians? It's not particularly good into Verdance, and Verdance is probably my riser for the weekend coming, to be honest. We can get more into that. I don't think it's particularly strong into the Warriors either. So I don't think the adoption rate is going to necessarily be super high, honestly.
Okay. So
what do you think?
Still think it's going to be in the top 3? I think it's going to be in the top 3. I have not, at least... I'm curious where you got your take that you think it's Gravy Bones favored into Slippy. That has not been my experience. I'm curious. I think that's maybe the matchup point which we disagree on, and because we disagree on that, I'm obviously don't follow along into the conclusion that he's not going to be very well represented. I do think he's going to be right up there. I think he's going to be sharing the spotlight with Gravy and Syndra. I don't expect him to be a very low. I could totally see him being the most represented, for example, or probably the second with Syndra being first. And at least so far, I believe he's just slightly favored into Gravy. My take on the matchup is that it's 55 towards Slippy. But it sounds like you have a different take, so that'll be interesting to see how it shakes out at the Pro Tour.
I think if Yeah, I mean that's from testing. I think if it had felt favored to me, I think I'd be playing Slippy. Honestly, I think that was actually probably the deciding factor for me not playing Slip to the Cracks. I think was that matchup in particular.
That's fair.
Because I think you need to have a good Gravia Syndrome matchup. Because I don't think, if you look down the list, like Earth Heroes, for instance, I think these Guardians, these heroes, like the heroes that you aren't able to target, I think can be a little bit awkward for you. If you want to beat, Kano, I think is a great matchup, but you do have to commit to playing the Spell Void slots, for instance. So that is taking up particular slots for you. But yeah, no, I do also think that people will, people might find strategies, right, that I was not able to find or feel comfortable on that made that matchup, or potentially maybe the gravy lists that people have been testing into have been different. So people will have confidence, I think, on Slips Through the Cracks. I do agree. I think there's no doubt in my mind that the top 3 decks from the Battle Hardened and the top 3 decks that we spoke about last week are still the same top 3 decks. It's Gravy, it's Syndra, it's Slippy.
I'm glad you brought up that perhaps the gravy lists are maybe a bit different, because I do think that's a great segue into talking about gravy, which is I think the next hero we should touch on. The lists are changing, and I think a big shift that we have seen. I'm looking at the Battle Hardened KL list, particularly looking at like the Michael Fung, the winner Evan Tangai, Michael Hamilton's lists. Whaler Humperdinck is back in these lists.
Yep.
It's ranging from anywhere between 1 to 2 copies, which last week we spoke about how those gravy lists that were teching for aggro perhaps opened themselves up to potentially being fatigued by random strategies they're not expecting. But now Humperdinck's back in the list, and so you have to... there is shifts going on. The gravies are now solving the other side of it. They sort of went too far into the beating aggro. Now they're stepping back a little bit and covering up, they're patching the hole on the fatigue angle. So I wonder whether that's part of it as well, where it's like perhaps the earlier impression that Slippy is like favored into gravy perhaps stemmed from that. Because I think one core aspect of the matchup was that as an assassin with a whole bunch of cards that say banish of the top card of your deck, I think Slippy was able to play on threatening 2 axes, basically. Threatening kill you / fatigue you. But now that gravy lists are changing and perhaps being more aware of that other weakness, maybe it just comes to Slippy has to try and kill the gravy. And I think at that point, I could totally see your take coming true, where it's just like, oh, maybe gravy ends up being favored. Because the numbers that deck puts out is nuts. I mean, if you look at the Battle Hardened KL finals, I mean, the gravy beat the Syndra, right? And it was big off the back of doing things like Swell and then drawing 2 cards off of a gold and then continuing on the turn, going Swells, Tipples, and then ending up with an ally when the ally's like a Rigor Mortis that attacks for 6. And when you sum up just the raw numbers he's doing, it matches aggro.
Yeah. I mean, when Gravy's on form, right? I think that is very true. Like the deck, I think the deck does have some real awkwardness and inconsistencies with where you draw your allies, your 2 block cards that can kind of be your undoing sometimes, not seeing the right combinations, like not seeing a blue at the right time or the right blue at the right time. But I think in general, a lot of the time when it comes together, it comes together. And so I think the more turns you have to be able to set that up, and the case of playing against Slippy, for instance, to get into these pivot situations, I think it then becomes really hard for Slippy, honestly, at that point. And if you can push damage in the earlier turns before that, to put them off cards potentially, then that's really strong. So yeah, I think it's gonna be I think it's been an interesting matchup all weekend, honestly. I think we're gonna see it a few times, that's for sure.
You know what gravy reminds me a little bit of? I feel like, we've drawn a lot of comparisons like Droma and Enigma and stuff.
Yeah.
I actually feel like so many times gravy is doing the thing, and I'm like, this reminds me of Chain. It reminds me of Chain because because it's a whole bunch of like small attacks that keep going wider and wider, and Graveyard being an additional hand, basically. This reminds, every time they play Golden Tipple, I'm reminded of Chain playing Art of War, where it's like the banish clause is actually fake because they just play the attack right after.
Sure.
Right? And I'm just like, every time Golden Tipple or Portside Exchange says discard a card, I'm like, that discard is fake because they're just gonna play that ally later anyway, so the card just says like draw a card, basically. And it's a whole bunch of like 3 go again, 3 go again. Saltwater Swell is basically belittle like what Chain used to play, and I'm just like, I'm feeling that a little bit, and I think that is sure. I mean, you can like obviously Chain was very, very different.
Yeah, poor man's Chain. I get the comparisons. Yeah,
and I think it's off the back of that, the raw numbers that come from the back of Tipples and Swells is how he's catching pace with Syndra and why these top players are still bringing him despite the other 2 decks being Slippy and Syndra, which are on the surface very aggressive decks, but Gravy's just like, I'm beating them on numbers anyway.
Yeah. I mean, hey, look, Syndra also has its awkwardness, right? Like, that deck can pump out some real damage, but the games where you draw, for instance, Blood Runs Deep and Wrath of Retribution versus the games that you don't, right, are significantly different. The games where you are able to keep your fealty up early and make sure that the deck's just super smooth, and the ones where you don't see a fealty in the first couple of turns is very different. I massively agree. So I think all these decks, and it's honestly the same in some ways for Arachne. It's like when you see your can you get a bonds turn off, for instance, versus if you can't get a bonds turn off early. Like, there's these things that are really impactful for all three of these heroes, I think. And I can understand why people see Gravy as the best deck in the format, because I do think it has these kind of different, it has a lot of play to it, right? It's like, well, my draw is bad, but I have these options to play into this, or I can lean into this card specifically, or you spoke about it before, be risk averse, or you take more risk, right? Be more risk tolerant. And I think that is the hero that Gravy is, because it has more of those decision points. I think in the grand scheme of things, personally, I think some of it comes out in the wash. It's just whether it's more, quote unquote agency or less agency that you feel with these heroes. But I 100% can see it. And it does do some extremely powerful stuff.
And off the back of that, like, something that I've been feeling as I look at the coverage, it's like people are like, oh yeah, Syndra like is very favored to Gravy. Syndra beats up Gravy. I'm not even sure I want to call that matchup higher than 60%, if that, for Syndra. It feels more so like close. In the 55 to like 58, if that even, right? Where would you put that matchup? And I think this may be perhaps a segue into Syndra, which is the other top 3 deck we are thinking of. Where would you put Syndra's Gravy matchup?
I'd be around 60%. I think this meta is really close. I don't think there's many matchups that are outside of that 40-60, outside of that 40-60 range, honestly. Just think it's so close. And I think there's a lot of strategies you can employ in certain matchups as well. So, yeah.
Okay, so on to Syndra. I mean, I'm not sure how much there is to talk about here. There isn't really a lot of innovation going on in this list, I think. Although I think something I do want to point out, we've spoken a lot about raw power level of decks. And Syndra, I think we both have agreed in the past, where it's like, she's not a raw power level deck. Like, her power level is like, it's fine. But I think the reason she's up here is kind of mostly because of Gravy. And also I feel similarly about Slippy as well, where I feel like Slippy and Syndra the raw power level isn't super high, whereas Gravy's is, but they, at least ostensibly for the Slippy, seems to be decent to Gravy, and that's why they are up here. I'm not entirely sure there's anything else we want to talk about Syndra. Anything else like coming to your mind?
I didn't see the finalist list, actually, so I've not seen that one. I did see Evan's Gravy list. The one thing I would say is I do think that it's maybe there is more power in Syndra than maybe I thought earlier in the season. I think I said last week, I think it just has been able to shine a little bit more in this format where there's a little bit less power that just can overrun it specifically. Because I think Flick Knives is just an insane card, and Syndra gets to abuse it so well, right? Just so cleanly. And I think the other thing as well is these lists have become a little bit cleaner. I think fealty is massively important. I think some of the lists from earlier in the national season probably didn't look as clean in the ways that they were able to play into making sure they had fealty at the right times, and I think they would see their hands clunk up. And if your hand clunks up with 2 blocks, it's a disaster for Syndra. So I think the sort of consistency element of Syndra has gotten better, I would say, in the list that I've been seeing. Although I can't comment on the finals list, I haven't actually seen it.
Actually, I think I remember seeing one card which was very unique when I was watching the stream. I was like, "Ooh, I don't think I've seen this in Syndra yet." And that was Pain in the Backside.
Oh,
I was like, "Ooh, that's not something I've seen in Syndra," and that, I think, it could be interesting innovation. I'm not entirely sure if it was brought in just for Gravy, or whether it's a main deck card. But I think that's
very good to Gravy, though. I think it's
that's a spicy inclusion.
Yeah, I think
because it kind of basically reduces your number of break turns, right? Since it's started, it's not draconic, but I don't think that's what super matters in that matchup. It's more of a that you can always get your mask draw, like threaten it at least, and keep putting pressure, and you don't break. So that was interesting.
I think Pain in the Backside is it's something that I know our groups played a little bit of, and I think it's pretty good. Whether that be sideboard or main deck, I think it depends on what ultimately your strategy is. But yeah, right. Should we? I mean, we've talked about the meta. We've talked about our winners. Should we get into, I guess, some predictions and things like that? I did just want to ask you, first of all, draft. We were talking about the limited coverage and personally being a big fan of the level ups there. You got any takes for draft? Got any things you think we're going to see, or predictions, things like that for draft?
I think one thing that I've been seeing that's like perhaps a bit different from US Nationals was I think people are less on the let's stay open for most of Pack 1 in case we get a Scurv Pack 2.
Yes.
I think the how do you say it? The focus on Scurv has definitely moved away a little bit, which is probably to be expected. I think you do lose quite a bit if you try and stay open Pack 1, like stay too open Pack 1, in the hopes that you get a Scurv, and if you don't get a Scurv, you have sort of, in a sense, conceded, like at least at one of your draft games, it feels like. You take a strategy, so like that thing I think has been reduced, so I'd be surprised to see a lot of focus on like this potentially getting a Scurv strategy. Other than that, I'm hoping at least that we see more Puffin success. I think a bit of a through line across national season was a lot of people were struggling to make Puffin work because there's very few players that were like comfortable drafting that deck and being able to perform with that hero in draft. I'm expecting that to change. I still expect Puffin to be like the 2-of in a pod, but I'm expecting instead of like what we saw, it was like every Puffin, even at the top tables, was like 1-2 at best. I'm expecting that to be better. I'd say those two are my main draft takes. Anything from you?
Similar. I'm going to go even further on the Scurv thing and say I think we'll see 1 3-0 Scurv the whole weekend. There you go.
I think Scurv has become, it's like if you see it Pack 1, then okay, you take it, but you want warping your draft around potentially seeing Scurv and Pack 2, which was a strategy people were doing though across national season.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that's probably my main things for draft. I also think for draft, we're just going to see people have a real range of how they're playing the heroes in a strategy standpoint. Like, I think you'll see a real difference in the valuation of allies and different allies. I think when it comes to Gravy, I think people have different values on each of the allies. There's some people who, like particular allies, and other players will be like, I don't take that ally if I see it, right? People have very, I think, specific views on this format, which is quite interesting, and some real differing views, which, yeah, I really like. I think it's cool. I think this format has clearly got some real play to it, a widespread across each of the 3 heroes, which I like.
I will also say I think we're gonna see more Manta Marlin. I think people have come around to Manta Marlin actually being
it's insane,
quite freaking strong in draft.
I think it's the best deck. If you can get it together, I think it's the best deck.
Yeah, and I think that's becoming more and more adopted. Whereas I think at least early in the season, at least across national season, I think people were like discovering that, but like now it's like it seems to be a known thing. So I expect to see all Manta Marlin as well.
It's really hard to draft, I will say, because you can get really punished for kind of trying to go into it, and then you end up with some cards if you have to go into cannon that just aren't good, and you end up with it feels like a 1-2 cannon deck, and it's like, oof.
Yeah, it feels actually quite a bit of like what can happen to Puffin. I feel like where I think Puffin wants to be a Spitfire deck, but if stuff doesn't line up like later on, and you end up needing to draft a few too many blues than you'd rather be on a Spitfire version, then suddenly you're like in this like half blunderbuss version of it, which just isn't that great. And yeah, I agree with you. I think Manta Marlin has that same vulnerability because Manta Marlin wants like, I don't know, 3 or 5 blues, but Cannon needs like 14. So then it's like you can, if you end up in the middle, you're kind of doing neither very well. Like if you have an 8 or 9 blue Manta deck, it's like it's hard for that to like work very well, be very impressive. And if you're an 8 or 9 blue like cannon deck, that's also not very impressive. So it's a bit of a fragile potentially thing. But if you're in that seat, I think people will definitely take advantage of it.
Right, let's get into our metagame predictions and other predictions for this Pro Tour Singapore. First of all, Pankaj, want to talk metagame. What is your prediction for the metagame specifically?
I'm gonna put Syndra, Slippy, Gravy, I think are top 3.
We agreed.
And we've already agreed on that, which is interesting because I think the past 2 weeks we spoke about the top 5 deck meta where Verdance and Prism were also there. But I think now, as we're leading up to PT, is more coalescing happening. I think we're on the same page where it's like there's these top 3, and then now Verdance and Prism are in the sort of like the next tier in terms of representation. Between these 3, I could see a world where any of these 3 and the one like first, second, and third most represented. I'm not entirely sure I could call. I'm not too confident about calling any of them to be like most represented or third most represented. You have.
Oh, you got to make a call though. That's the point. You got to make a call. What's your call?
All right. I'm gonna say Syndra most represented, Gravy second most represented, and Slippy third most represented.
Oh, man, that's kind of boring. I have the exact same thing.
No, wait. You have Slippy as second.
Yeah, I think as I've gone through the day today, I've changed my mind. I think that's where I'm at right now.
Oh,
Yeah,
I see. He's changing the show notes on me live, people.
Hey,
by the way,
you know,
call him out for this.
I'll give you percentages. I think Syndra is going to be around 17 to 18% of the meta. I think Gravy's going to be around 15 to 17%, and I think Slippy's going to be around 14 to 17%. So I agree they could be 1, 2, or 3 in that order. I think they're going to be in that order. I think they're going to be roughly that amount of played. I think there's 1 or 2, maybe 3% between each of the 3 of them, which is crazy. We've never really been in that position before. And for that percentage to be kind of that low for the most played deck is pretty rare. We've not had that very often. We've generally had at least a deck with a 2 in front of it, generally.
Yeah.
I think
one through line, though, that I think is consistent across our predictions is that I definitely predict... Like, I'm on the lower end usually when I'm like even the most represented, and I generally predict like it won't be that much. Like my prediction for Syndra is 15%.
Yeah, well, that's
I don't
very
know
low.
As
That's
the
the
most
lowest
yeah.
significantly. Yeah, because
I won't be like...
I think the lowest previously was 19%.
Yeah, I think the meta is significantly wider than like that time. So it's like 15, and I have like 14 and 13 as like second and third most represented. So like 15 for Syndra, 14 for Gravy, and 13 for Slippy is like the way I would guess.
I could see it. I think after that, I have Verdance and Prism as like a real sharp drop off. I have them in like high single digits, maybe cracking into the low double digits, something like Verdance at like a 10 or 11%. And then I think it's going to be another big drop off to the likes of Victor, Arachne Marionette, Florian at around that like 5 to 7%, 4 to 7% range. Honestly, that's what I think the meta is going to look like. And there's going to be a bunch of heroes in and around that 2, 3, 4% that people will try and bring in and be heroes on, I guess.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot to explore there, and I think particularly, I want to come back to a little bit to the Azalea LL thing.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I think the biggest, I think that the discourse I've been seeing the most in terms of the biggest winner of Azalea LLing is Acilio, and I think Acilio already had a fairly unique angle in the meta, and if he has one less predator to think about, I do wonder whether he can come out to play, but I don't expect him to be well represented is the thing. It's a very short turnaround to pick up that deck, and the deck is complicated. But
definitely,
I could see Acilio making a deep run, and if an Acilio makes top 8, I'm not surprised. I mean, I think, I don't know what Alex Vore is playing, but he played Acilio at US Nats, and he's like one of the, it's his deck. It's like he's that sort of player. I could totally see him showing up on Acilio and being very happy that Azalea LL'd and succeeding on that hero.
Yep, me too.
As well as other well-known Acilio players, obviously. Yuto is another one.
Mm-hmm. What is the best deck for this event, for Pro Tour?
I think it's Gravy Bones.
Yeah, you just think it has the best matchup spread, the strongest deck?
Yeah, I think even your worst matchups in like Syndra, I mean, we've seen time and time again, like on stream, the Gravy is just like beating the Syndra because the numbers are pretty insane. And then it's a thing where it's like your worst matchup isn't that bad, but then you have a bunch of auto wins. And I think the auto wins part was perhaps contentious a week or two ago because it was turning out that these other decks like your Verdances or whatever were like, oh wait, maybe we found this fatigue angle into you. But now that they are fixing that with like the Humperdinck and whatever being aware of that potential strategy, I think they're getting closer to like they have these heavily favored matchups, and then their worst matchups are 55. And you're like, okay. I mean, the worst match was like 45 for them. So it's just like, to me, it just feels like the best. And the other thing, this is maybe being a little bit meta in that it's maybe not the best deck, but a lot of the best players are bringing Gravy Bones. And so that's perhaps a different question.
That's a different question.
But I think
that's a different question.
Yeah, it is. But I think it can also affect my evaluation where, like, you know, if you... Like, you know, players like Michael Hamilton always play just what's the best deck, right?
Yeah, like
so
Bravo at Worlds in Barcelona.
Okay, well, you get what I'm saying. Most of the time, they're kind of just playing like the best thing.
Arachne slips the cracks in London.
Which was? I mean, Arachne slips the cracks was good.
Hey, I'm just playing devil's advocate here. Michael is a phenomenal player, but I'm going to question some of his deck choices over the years. I'll tell you what.
But yeah, when it's like, you know, when a whole bunch of like these like top teams are like bringing Gravy, I'm kind of like, I think that's my pick for best deck.
Fair enough.
What's yours?
Well, so I I would say like I'm two numbers down on the dial from you, right? Like I just dial it back a little bit on Gravy, and so that causes me a lot of trouble for picking what I think the best deck is, because I think, yes, I agree, like Gravy has, I think people are solving the fatigue matchup, and I think that angle has kind of gone away. Like personally, actually, I was testing a lot of like fatigue Florian and was like, oh, I actually think this might be a good angle. And I just ultimately just wasn't quite good enough. Honestly, I think it's so close. I've continued to try even into this week to try and tweak it, but I just haven't been able to get it there. Because I also think people have adapted. But it was like, hey, do I have a strategy that's good into the top 3 decks here? And it's like, maybe ultimately not the case against the best players in the world. That's for sure.
Yeah, and like again, right? I mean, I feel like we sort of called this a week or two ago. Like the same, I feel like history's just repeating itself. But the same thing happened with Dromai, where they were like, oh, once they started cutting ghostly touches or whatever, and then Guardians were like, hey, what if we just run them out of dragons? And then the Dromai players just got better, and like they were just like, it's fine. I'll just pitch that Chromai Mirage Passing Mirage, rake the embers, you burn them all, and nice fatigue plan, idiot. Like here you go. I didn't change the list very much. I just changed the way I play it because my deck has those tools. And I think that's happening in Gravy too. It's like they're like, okay, maybe they add like one hump a day. Like the rest of it is still mostly the same, and they're just being more careful. They're like, okay, it's gonna be like we're gonna set up a double Chum Sawbones turn or whatever, or Chum Sawbones Humperdinck turn, and then be like, cool, you can't fatigue this anymore. Just because I'm using the tools I was already playing, just in a better way.
Yeah, a lot of them are using like, it looked like Evan's list. He's got like Pearl Amulet plus the Humperdinks, right? 2 Humperdinks
Exactly.
and set up those kind of turns. And yeah, I think that's the solution, right? One thing I would say is during that particular meta where Dromai, like there was a deck that could fatigue it, but then that hit Living Legend, and then like the floodgates opened where like other people were trying to fatigue, and I agree, it was just bad. So I think we're getting potentially into a very similar position, especially like with these Humperdinck plans and stuff. So yeah, I'm on board. But I think, you talked about like no matchup worse than 45. I do think Syndra is that. I do think even, like Dorinthia, for an example, is that. I do think it has some matchups that are bad. But yeah, I agree. It does seem like it just has some, I don't know if Verdance is a free one, honestly. I think there's going to be some Verdance players that find an angle into the hero. I think, Prism. Like if I look at these top 5 decks, I'm like, Verdance, Prism, Slippy, Syndra. And if I'm the Gravy player, like, nothing's terrible for me, but is anything actually amazing for me in that top 5 apart from Verdance? And that's assuming that Verdance players haven't found a plan into me.
Yeah, that's a fair point, which I think, again, goes back to why those other decks are even there to begin with, right? I think we both are aligned on that Slippy and Syndra aren't absolute power level strong decks, but they're here because they are like the ones that can actually play into Gravy.
And Verdance.
And
from Syndra's perspective, at least.
Yeah, so Verdance has the raw power level, but it's kind of just is being a little bit.
It's a bad spot.
It's just meta-wise doesn't have a great spread right now.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, all that to say, I think the best deck to pick for the event is honestly so close. I thought that someone would find a fatigue strategy that was robust enough to be good. I've not been able to find it. I think maybe someone else might be able to find it. If I look past that, I actually think it's Syndra, because I think Syndra has the best matchup spread in the top 5 decks personally.
I can see it. Yeah, good into Verdance, good into Gravy, and then in Slippy, it's you can play the game. Like you are allowed to play the game. It's not a lunch matchup. But yeah, Prism can be rough, but all right. I could see it.
As in, like Slippy's not a lunch matchup for Syndra.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely not.
Like I mean, I think Syndra's unfavored, but it's you do play the game.
But it's close. There's a lot. That's what I mean. These matchups are so close. Like I said, I don't think there's anything outside of a 40-60 in these top 5 decks, except for maybe you would say Gravy into Verdance, Prism into Verdance. Like that's why I think Verdance isn't such a tough spot. But I think the rest of them, and that's at worst. I think honestly, I'm not even super sure that that's true.
Verdance Prism, if the Verdance has like the 7s, like red fruits and stuff, she's allowed to play. It's like not worse than 40. I agree with you on that.
Yeah, cool. All right, which deck? Okay.
Real quick about the Syndra piece, and this, I'm sort of rewinding back a little bit in terms of innovations and evolutions of the Syndra deck. I think it's clear that if you're trying to bring Syndra to this meta, you're like, okay, cool, like we saw like Pain in the Backside. You're adding in more tech for Gravy, but I think it's clear that you perhaps need to respect Slippy
definitely
quite a bit, and I do wonder for that reason. Do you expect innovation on the Syndra side, particularly in the form of defense reactions like what's that Draconic one? The one Loyalty Beyond the Grave.
Yep.
I do wonder, like that's a card I haven't quite been seeing in Syndra lists, but I have to wonder, when it gets Slippy, where a lot of the times the 0 for 4 D reacts don't feel so good because they keep going up in multiples of 3, right? They start at 3 and they pump by 3 every time.
Yep.
I do wonder whether Loyalty Beyond the Grave suddenly becomes like a very, very appealing pick for the Syndra side, and whether maybe that's an innovation we could see in that list. Do you have any thoughts on the defense reaction aspect for Syndra particularly?
Yes. My answer is yes. I think defense reactions are good in Syndra.
Is that partly why? Yeah, and is that partly why you have the Syndra Slippy matchup? Like you seemed very. It's like it felt you very strongly were like, Syndra and the Slippy, sure, Syndra's unfavored, but it's definitely a game to be played. And is that
I played a lot of that
little
matchup.
bit from?
Yeah, I played a lot of that matchup. I think
All right.
If both players are prepared, I think it's pretty close. But I think there's definitely lists of, and like I say, I also think the Syndra lists are just looking better than they were 2 weeks ago. Like more equipped for this slightly narrower meta, and I think that's really important. Really important.
That's awesome.
What deck is actually a trap for this Pro Tour?
I think it's Syndra. It's so funny because you had it as like the best deck. To me, I'm still struggling to see why. I'm struggling to see a very good reason to play Syndra over the cracks. But I guess now that you're better into Gravy than Slippy is. You're better into Verdance than Slippy is.
You're better into a lot of the rest of the meta as well. Honestly, you're much better against fatigue, friggin' strategies.
Yeah,
as
and you're better into like an odd warrior that shows up. And you're both bad into like a victor that shows up. So you know what? I'm gonna take it back. Syndra's not the trap, but like, so the trap has to be like a deck from the top 5, right?
Yeah, I think so.
So then I guess the biggest trap would be Verdance, but it feels really strange to say that because I think anyone who's bringing Verdance has found something for Gravy. But that'll be the one I question the most, I guess. Prism's looking. You know what? Actually, I'm gonna go with Prism. I think Prism's one of those heroes where once people are aware that you are around and they respect you even just a little bit, I think the difference between like one playset of 7s in your deck just makes such a massive difference in the matchup already, and it can go between like you're not allowed to make as aggressive plays anymore, or sometimes you're forced into making them, and you just lose like the 1/7 they drew at the right time. To me, it puts Prism in a spot where if people are respecting you, it's very tough ask to bring. So okay, my answer to the trap is Prism.
Oh, I think it's so close, honestly. I actually think Prism might get paid off this weekend because it's really dropped away in representation. I wonder if people will actually cut poppers from their deck, and that might benefit. Prisms might benefit this coming weekend. But I honestly think it's so tough for me. I think I can see reasons why everything, honestly, but Syndra is a trap, potentially. But, so, if I talk Gravy, I think the reason I would ever say Gravy, I think, is because I think people might not have the right lists and they might not have the right plans. And they might not, probably just maybe shouldn't be playing Gravy. And I just spoke before, I'm like, of these top 5 decks, which matchups is Gravy really excited to play against? But at the same time, it doesn't have terrible matchups, right? And I think that's really important. I think Verdance, when you look on paper, has really bad matchups in the top 5, so you're like, surely that's the trap. And then Slippy, I'm just like, if the meta is as wide as we think it is, that's really bad for Slippy. So I'm going to say Slippy, I guess.
Yeah, okay. That's a hot take for sure, because I think, like we spoke about this earlier, where I feel like the community sentiment is perhaps shifting towards who Slippy might be. Very, very good.
I think both Gravy and Slippy
I could totally see it.
I think both Gravy and Slippy will have not great win rates on day one. That's my prediction, I think.
Going back to the popper piece, though, I think one other thing that I've been seeing in a lot of the Gravy lists, at least especially, is the introduction of Blanche, which is like for the mirror. But again, that's the sort of thing where I'm like, that just casually just like hoses Prism. Because it's both a 7 and something that's really strong to send at the Prism as well.
Yeah.
And you have to wonder whether, if some other decks try and pick up Blanche to try and deal with Gravy, and it's just Prism's just getting sort of caught in the crossfire, if you will.
Yeah, potentially. Right, let's move on. Next question. What's going to win the PT then, Pankaj? Which deck or hero will win the PT?
Gravy Bones.
Yeah, you spoke about the top teams, right? That was kind of, I guess, leading to this question a little bit as well.
Yeah, it's part of that. A lot of the strongest players are on this deck. And also, again, like, I think watching the Battle in Kuala Lumpur and the Pro Press Plus just, I think, cemented, like, my take on this deck, where it's just, I still think they could have hit something in the BNR, and like, particularly, like, Call to the Grave, probably, or even, like, Saltwater Swell. I think the numbers on this deck are just a little bit too high. The raw power level is just a little bit too high, I think. So like for example, I mean, yeah, we saw it beat a Syndra again on stream.
Hey,
There was
we
a
also
game.
saw Justin Koo, right, calling champion for on Team Armory, I believe, right, lose to a Syndra on stream as well at that event.
Yeah, yeah. But the other game I want to point out is like there was a game against like Dash.io. I think it was against Esmond in the PQ Plus. I think it was Michael Fung versus Esmond. And it was like Dash.io got like 2 max Vs off with 2 red boom grenades, and the game still was really, really close and came down to a 1-to-1. And it came down to like, if Fung hit a swell, actually, he went for a blind swell, and if hit a blue, actually, he just would have won. But he didn't hit, and it was still like a 1-to-1 super tight game. But I'm just like, it feels like if you, as like this board state deck, if you're able to match like double red boom grenade, double max V from a Dash.io, I'm just like, this numbers on this deck are just pretty freaking high, where I'm just like, I think, and coupled with the fact that a lot of the best players are on this, to me just makes it be the deck that's winning.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting though. We talked about bad matchups. I agree that that game looked really close. I mean, the semifinals was 2 very good players, Chu Hing against Sam Sutherland, also a very good player, of course, Dash.io, and then Michael Fung versus Esmond Heng, and both the Dash.ios won those matchups, right? So if you want to talk about matchups on stream and who was winning things, there was some people putting the sword to the gravy as well. Which was quite interesting. So
Yeah,
it just goes back to how close this meta is. Honestly, for me, that's what it goes back to.
So did you say what your prediction is for a winning deck?
I hadn't yet. I'm gonna say Syndra.
Okay.
I'm gonna say Syndra. I actually said my notes. I said the best drafter who chooses a good deck, and it goes well for them. But I think it's probably Syndra, honestly.
Could see it. Actually, little segue. Let's talk about. We sort of touched on Acilio potentially being a unique angle. Dash.io as well, I think, perhaps gained something from Azalea leaving.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna bring up like we said we're gonna talk about as a main topic in like the Command and Cookout. I think Dash.io has a strength which I'm not entirely sure everyone has picked up on, which is the fridge now is absolutely massive. It's a Runeblade level fridge. And I think Null Time Zone as well is just one of those cards where it's not a card I hear being talked about a lot, but that card is kind of nuts. Like, that card is very, very good. And I think the skilled Dash.ios that like have experience and have reps and know like the card that would like beat them in a certain spot, or know the opponent's decks and know like the ratios that they might be on and like what they haven't seen, and like be able to like hit the correct calls on that card, could just like steal games, or just actually push them into being favored into matchups you don't expect it, alongside the 9-block fridge, right? Which also can block again one more time for 1 or something, or whatever. It's like a massive fridge. I'm just like, okay, this deck, when I see like strong players pilot it does.
It looks scary.
It can be scary. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
But I think it's a similar spot as like a Celio, I feel like, where it's like sort of, it's like maybe less fragile than a Celio, but less overly explosive. And I think it definitely gained something from Azalea leaving as well.
Yep, I'd agree with that. Cool. Right, and then one more question. Winning player or team, feel free to shout out any multiples if you want.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard not to say Pablo Pintor because he's already a 2-time champ. It's a little hard for me not to say Michael Hamilton because I think we spoke about this. I think there was a bit of a meme or something at some point where it's like he's almost got the Infinity Gauntlet complete, and in terms of he's won Worlds, he's won US Nationals, he's won like his Nationals, he's won a bunch of Callings, Battle Ardens, but he hasn't won a Pro Tour yet. So this would be like his, the last Infinity Stone for that. And something that we spoke about this in a pre-show, but something that I'm personally hoping for is a Blue Pitch member taking it down. I think it's been a long time coming. Like,
yeah.
So many times they're like just in the bubble. They're like in top 16. They put so many copies in like top 16, top 32, like every Pro Tour. They're like one of the most, if not the most consistent team in Flesh and Blood. Yeah. And I'm like, I want to see them take it down. And of course, the other one, member of the Arsenal Pass team. Maybe it's you, Hayden. Maybe this time.
Maybe. It's probably Wash, though. That's his problem. He's got to pick a deck first. We'll see how we go. I think I'm going to shout out. I chose Arthur Trehay for Pro Tour London, and then his teammate, Pablo Pintor, on the exact same 80 cards, ended up winning the PT, so I got that one a little bit wrong. But I'll shout out Arthur again, Team Armory, and I'd love to see, a showdown between someone from Team Armory, potentially Arthur Trehay, And I'm going to shout out Michael Yazga from the team that I'm a part of, PCG Pass. I think, coming off the back of a top 8 at London, he's young, he's hungry, and I've given him a hard enough time on this pod for being a Levire enjoyer and registering that for a Pro Tour before, but pretty certain he's not going to register that for this Pro Tour, so I'm gonna back him based on that.
Yeah, he took that to heart. He's like, fine, I'll play a good deck and just casually top 8s. It was so funny. I remember actually I think there was just like a week or two before the Pro Tour, I think he was playing Florian at some event, and I was like, bro, what are you doing? Why are you playing this meme? Because it was just, Enigma was still around, right? And Enigma was like very well represented. I'm like, Aurora, I don't think Aurora Florian was particularly good for Florian, right? They still had the Flicker Wisp thing.
Yeah.
So it was just like, I was like, what are you doing? And then anyway, he switches to playing an Aurora. I messaged him and was like, see, this is what happens when you play a good deck, you actually top 8 the thing.
I know, right? It's amazing what happens. So, any final thoughts? I'm just going to share mine quickly, Pankaj, before I throw to you. I think this is one of the closest metagames that we've ever had. It's not just in terms of the amount of heroes that are potentially viable, especially in that second bracket after that top 3 like we spoke about. It's not just the fact that there's so many different strategies that players can try and enact, but it is a big part of that. I think a matchup can really vary between 60, 70% favored, unfavored, between two exact same heroes, depending on the way that the players have chosen to build the decks, the way that they've chosen to play the match, the way that the match itself unfolds. I think it's very, very close in all these aspects, and small things can determine winners. And I think for that reason, as close as this metagame is, I think these decks will rise to the top, because I think the best players will play them, and the best players are going to get rewarded in this metagame because of just how much they make great micro decisions, how they prepare in the right ways and understand different strategies that are out there. And so, yeah, I just think this is... one thing I wanted to say is that coming into the Worlds Osaka and Pro Tour London, I was 1,000% confident in how the metagame would unfold and sort of the lay of the land of what the meta looked like. And for this, I just really don't know which decks are actually good and which ones have good matchups or some good strategies that help them get there. And that is making it very difficult. And I think that's why, even me and you, Pankaj, right, we're so opposed on a couple of strengths of decks right now. I said best deck, Syndra. You said trap, Syndra, right? It is that close, I think. So that is my final words before I head to play Pro Tour Singapore.
Fully agree with everything you said there. And what I'm going to add to it is one aspect of this super close and tight metagame that I'm really looking forward to is I think this is a very, very good ground for a real dark horse, either in terms of strategy or in terms of deck. So I think Acilio-IO are they're sort of on people's radars, maybe not quite a dark horse-ish, but it's a bit of a unique angle into the format. But I'm also thinking of something like the Command and Cookout question, we think of Ira, and I do wonder where it's if you are, say, a Gravy sitting across a blind Ira, can these Iras take advantage of the fact that you maybe don't know whether they're going to fatigue you or run you down, and that sort of puts pressure on how you sideboard. And I feel that's a very specific example, but I do want to just talk about that overall theory of it, of really leveraging how open this meta is, meaning that people may not really know your strategy if you show up with a unique pick. They don't know what your strategy is trying to be into them, and whether you can actually capitalize on that is something that I'm quite looking forward to.
Yeah, 100%. Well, with all that said, thank you very much for listening to Arsenal Pass. Thank you to all Arsenal Pass patrons, and you'll see Pankaj very soon on the coverage of Pro Tour Singapore, World Tour Singapore, but you'll see, of course, both of us next week on the podcast. So until the next episode, we'll see you then.